Again, everyone, welcome to week 3. Super excited for this. This is the halfway point. So we have tonight and next week, and then we're done. And you'll know everything there is to know about the book of Revelation. Let me just make sure this is yeah, that's good. All right, great. Let me say a word of prayer, and we'll get started. God, thank you so much for this night and this group of people. All of us here want to understand your word better. God, thank you for this encouraging and applicable book. And we ask that you, Holy Spirit, would give us guidance and understanding and clarity as we seek to understand together some of the parts that can be confusing. And would you just lead this night? In your name we pray. Amen. Amen. All right, plan for tonight. We're going to do some teaching on apocalyptic symbols and images. I'm actually going to first start with a little bit of review just to make sure we're all on the same page. But then we're going to talk about apocalyptic symbols and images. And on your handout, we're going to start with the one that says Daniel's apocalyptic visions. We're going to start with something that is a little more clear because we have the benefit of history in hindsight of 2020 looking back. And so we're going to start with the more clear, and then we're going to use the lessons we learned from the book of Daniel and then apply those lessons to first Revelation chapters 12 through 14. And then we're going to do a test case again. The test case is where Jake and I present those views in detail, the preterist view, idealist, futurist, historicist. We're going to do that for Revelation chapter 17, the whole thing. And then Jake's going to give us an overview of the events and some of the main images in Revelation chapters 18 and 19. And that's going to cover the text part for tonight. So next week is just Revelation 20 through 22. Then we'll have some time for Q&A. And if we have enough time, then we'll give you some practice, some hands-on experience using these 4 lenses to look at the Battle of Armageddon, which is at the very end of Revelation chapter 19. So a quick review as we start jumping in. The book of Revelation has 3 genres. When you read the first 4 verses of the book of Revelation, you find out that it's a 3-genre book. First 4 verses, John says that this is the revelation or the apocalypse of Jesus Christ. And apocalyptic writing was a kind of writing commonly known and used in the first century. Right? So he called it an apocalypse. Later he said, blessed is the one who reads and those who hear the words of this prophecy. So he called it a prophecy. And then finally, he starts using the forms that were common to first century letters. So apocalypse, prophecy, and letter. Again, what that means is Revelation is a mutt. Just like our dog, Clover is a mutt, and she's a cute mutt, yeah. So Revelation is a mutt, a genre mutt. And so the thing is, when you look at these 3 genres and how to read them, and you kind of dig into different aspects of different ones, as you seek to do that, you come up with 4 different lenses. These are the 4 lenses we've been talking about and we'll continue to look at tonight. We have the preterist, idealist, historicist, and futurist. The preterist says almost everything, especially Revelation 1 through 19, were about events that were future from the time of John's writing, but past to us. They were all fulfilled probably by AD 70 or a little bit after that. The idealist view says these are mostly symbolic things, that most of what we read in the book of Revelation is timeless, talking about timeless principles and truths. Historicist says it's events that began to be fulfilled in the first century and then have been fulfilled ongoingly throughout history since then. And some of those events are still yet to come at Jesus' second coming. And then finally, the futurist says all of it is future. So, 3 genres: prophecy, letter, and apocalypse. And apocalypse is the genre we are digging into more. Last week we looked at the use of numbers in apocalyptic writing. Tonight we're looking at the use of images and symbols in apocalyptic writing. Remember, apocalypse just means unveiling or revealing. It does not mean zombies, or it doesn't even technically mean the end of the world. It's the unveiling or the revealing of Jesus Christ. It's the revelation of Jesus Christ and who holds the keys to history. Week 1, we talked about 10 different characteristics of apocalyptic literature. I'm not going to read through these, but I want to draw your attention to set up what we're talking about today of characteristic 6, symbolism. Code words, numerology, and cryptic symbols are often used in apocalyptic writing. And so, as we dig into apocalyptic symbols and images, again, now we're going to turn to Daniel chapter 7. So, this is Daniel chapter 7, and we're reading this because, number one, hindsight helps us understand what Daniel was foreseeing in his day and age. And then, number two, this is the same kind of writing that Revelation is. This is apocalyptic prophecy, right? And that's what Revelation is as well. It's also a letter. But this is going to give us clues and understanding about how to read and understand the symbols and images we find. In Daniel chapter 7, he receives this vision of four beasts. We're only going to focus on the first three, just because the fourth one, we could do the same thing, but it would take a lot more time because it's more involved and detailed. So Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 through 6. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he was lying in bed. He wrote down the substance of his dream. Daniel said, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me were the four winds of heaven, churning up the great sea. Four great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. The first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground, so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, 'Get up and eat your fill of flesh.' After that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard. And on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule." And then Daniel goes on and describes this fourth beast in greater detail. And then skipping forward to verse 15. "I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit, and the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me. I approached one of those standing there and asked him the meaning of all this. So he told me and gave me the interpretation of these things. The 4 great beasts are 4 kings that will rise from the earth. But the holy people of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever. Yes, forever and ever." So a couple things are significant for us. Daniel is told that these 4 great beasts that he saw represent 4 kings. And there's a lot of clear parallels between these beasts that he sees here and the vision of a statue that Nebuchadnezzar has a dream about earlier in the book of Daniel. In fact, when you put them together, it seems very clear that they're actually the same thing, just different visions that represent the same thing. And so the consensus is, now there's some other views, but overall, like very strong consensus, is that you can map these 4 beasts that Daniel sees onto the kingdoms that came after his time, or started during his time, and came after his time, and then ended with the coming of Christ. So first Daniel sees, I'm going to read it again. The first was like a lion. It had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it. This is the first beast. And if you go back to the vision of the statue he has, there's a head of gold, and Daniel is even told then, this head of gold, this first thing I see, is you, Nebuchadnezzar, in the kingdom of Babylon. So most people say this lion with eagle's wings is Babylon, and that actually matches a lot of what we know about Babylon and Babylonian religion. The lion represented Ishtar, the goddess of fertility, love, and war. This is actually a picture of the Ishtar gate in Babylon. So there's a lion there. Lions represented Babylon. We think the eagles probably represent swift conquest, that Babylon was swift to conquer other kingdoms. And then the part about the wings being ripped off, the mind of a human being given to it, that sounds very similar to what happened to Nebuchadnezzar himself early on. If you remember the story where he's prideful, his heart is lifted up, and then he's given the mind of a beast for 7 years. And then after 7 years, he humbles himself. And he's given the mind of a human again. So do you see the parallels here? How it's like, oh, this kind of sounds like. All right, second beast. There before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, "Get up and eat your fill of flesh." The kingdom that came after the Babylonians was the Medo-Persian Empire. And out of the Medes and the Persians, The Persians were much stronger. So the bear being on one side probably represents that one aspect of this empire was stronger than the other. The Persian Empire was also famous for its lumbering bureaucracy. So the image of the bear kind of fits this like strong but slow. I know bears aren't always slow, but that's kind of seems to be the feeling there. And the Persians ruled over three nations, the Babylonians, the Lydians, and the Egyptians. So this could be the three ribs in the bear's mouth, the three kingdoms that this bear has devoured. So Medo-Persian Empire. And then finally he sees the strangest one, the leopard with four wings. Let me actually just read it. One that looked like a leopard. On its back had four wings like those of a bird. This beast had four heads, and it was given authority to rule. We think that the leopard, right, very fast animal, and also the four wings, that both of these relate to swiftness or speed. It can run really fast, and it can even fly around. This sounds a lot like Alexander the Great and his famous conquest of actually even more than the known world of that time. In just 12 years, he conquered a crazy huge area, all the way from Greece to Egypt to India in 12 years. It's fascinating and amazing. But he died without an heir. After a little bit of time of unrest, what happened? His kingdom was divided amongst four generals and became four kingdoms. And so we think that's the four heads of this leopard. All right, is it making sense? You guys following along? So, first of all, kind of a snarky question. Should Daniel have understood these visions literally? Will there literally be a lion with wings like an eagle? Will there literally be a bear with three ribs on one side? Right? No, these stand for kingdoms. And we know that even because it says that, right? It says these stand for kings that are going to come. We should understand it apocalyptically. Now, here's my main point. If you remember nothing else from tonight and Luke's little mini lecture on symbols and images, apocalyptic visions function much like, in our culture, political cartoons. All right? I'll just give you a moment to read this and enjoy it. All right, so someone tell me what's going on in this picture.
The government did not solve the problem.
Okay. Yes. All right. All right. So you see this big bad inflation monster coming to ruin us, or looking like he's going to murder someone. All right. Inflation's coming to murder something. And what's going on? All right. Inflation Reduction Act failed. All right. Yes. Okay. Now, how do you know that this is represents Democrats? But how do you?
Because it's their symbol.
Yeah, it's their symbol, right? That's what it represents, right? Now, okay, here's what you have to imagine. Okay, imagine for a moment. Instead of having this actual picture, imagine you wrote down a description of this picture. Okay, all right. A donkey is shooting a gun, but it's not really a real gun, and it rolls out, right? And there's a huge man with a knife with the word name inflate, whose name is inflation. Okay, and you write down a description of this political cartoon, and then someone finds it in 2,000 years. How does that feel? Right? It is depressing. It should cause a measure of humility. We should not be going, I know this symbolizes blank, right? It's like, well, let's do our homework here. And that can be frustrating, but it's important. All right, this, what I just did for the book of Daniel with these four beasts, three actually only, we want to understand this kind of thinking with Revelation now. All right? So what we just did with Daniel, we're going to actually walk through, and I'm going to do my best to do that with with Revelation now. And we're going to work through Revelation 12, 13, 14. So we're going to start with Revelation 12. And we're not going to read everything. When we get to Revelation chapter 17, our test case, then we'll dig in and read that whole passage and then explain what we think is going on there and the different views. And also, I'm not going to necessarily separate out how a preterist or idealist or historicist or futurist. I'm just trying to give you some of the things in your handout are consensus views. Some of these things I'm going to tell you just all the views agree on. that this image and symbol means. And some of them are a little bit more debated, and I just gave you what I think is most convincing. So this is Luke's view a little bit. All right. Revelation chapter 12, where John writes, "A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in labor and agony as she was about to give birth." All right, pause. And it goes on to describe a dragon. So John sees a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. If you've read through your Old Testament, especially the book of Genesis, this should remind you of a vision a man named Joseph had about his brother and his brothers and his mother and his father, right? This is reminiscent of the people of Israel. It's also reminiscent of Genesis 3:15, where God promises to Adam and Eve right after the fall, in the midst of him telling them all the consequences of the fall. He says, actually, I'm just going to read it so I don't butcher it with my bad summarizing. This is Genesis 3:15. God says, "I will put hostility between you and the woman." So he's speaking to the serpent, which you find out actually if you do a search is the same or an interrelated word with dragon. So "I will put hostility between you and the woman, and between your offspring," or your seed, "and her offspring. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel." So most say this woman represents the Old Testament people of God as they're laboring and waiting for the coming of the Messiah. And later, John says he sees that the woman gives birth, and that the dragon, and actually John even tells us that the dragon is Satan. He just says that. So, all right, we know what one of these is, right? The dragon is Satan, and the dragon tries to devour the child, right? Satan tries to take Jesus out. You think about when Jesus was a baby, and Herod's coming to try and kill all the babies, right? Satan wants to take Jesus out, and he does not succeed. The child being brought to heaven could be Christ's ascension to heaven after his earthly work is complete. There's other images here talking about the woman being given wings like an eagle to flee to the wilderness. This is language very similar to how God describes rescuing his people from Egypt. He says, "I brought you out on wings like eagles from Egypt, from your captivity." And so a couple things you're going to start to see is the better you know the Bible in general, the more the symbols and images in the book of Revelation are going to make sense. And it goes on. But it looks like the woman represents Old Testament Israel, the child Jesus, and then it ends with the dragon going to war against the woman and her offspring, which would be the spiritual descendants of the woman and the Messiah, right? That's us, God's children. The dragon is making war against God's people still today. Revelation chapter 13. This is where he sees these two different beasts, one who comes from the sea and one who comes from the land. So just to summarize, a beast with 10 horns and 7 heads. Now, interesting side note, there is even a possible parallel to what we just read from the book of Daniel here. If you look at the 4 beasts that Daniel saw and you count up the number of heads total of the 4 beasts he sees, it is 7. And so John sees a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. And the last beast that Daniel sees in the vision, the one we didn't read about, has 10 horns. So this beast with 10 horns and 7 heads rises out of the sea. The dragon, again, that's Satan, we're told that. So the dragon gives this beast his power and authority, which he exercises for 42 months, which is 3.5 years, or 1,260 days, right? These are all synonyms, right? Then he sees another beast rise out of the earth with 2 horns like a lamb, and that speaks like a dragon. It performs signs. It gives life to an image of the beast, and it does not allow anyone to buy or sell without the mark of the beast, which is 666, on their right hand or forehead. We talked a little bit about this last week. Again, 666, I'm convinced, you have it in your last bullet point, that that's a reference to Nero Caesar. So that could be pointing to historic Nero Caesar, or it could be that in the future there will be a revived future Nero-like figure. The sea is a common Old Testament symbol for the Gentile world and its nations, And actually, we think that's why Daniel saw these kingdoms come out of the sea, right? Daniel saw that too. Do you remember that at the beginning of his vision? These beasts that he saw came up out of the sea as well. And so it's like these are Gentile kingdoms. When we get to Revelation 17 and look in detail at that, the first beast comes back there. This beast with 10 horns and 7 heads. And actually, the 10 horns and the 7 heads are explained in detail there. So I'm not going to get into that yet, but we're going to get into that in detail when we turn to Revelation 17. The second beast has 2 horns like a lamb. This could be like a parody of Jesus, right? Like Jesus is the Lamb of God, almost like a fake lamb. That could be part of it. This could also be a reference to when Jesus warned us, like when he said, look out for wolves that go around in sheep's clothing. False prophets, false people who speaking for God. So this could point to false religion in general or a specific false prophet. All right. So, but are you guys seeing how this works? Right. And then Revelation 14, John sees the Lamb standing with 144,000. 3 angels announce 3 different things, but all these relate to the hour of judgment has come, Babylon has fallen, and if anyone has worshipped the beast, they're going to receive judgment. And then John sees the harvest of the earth, and interestingly, this happens in 2 parts. First, he's told to reap the earth, and then to harvest the grapes. And when he harvests the grapes, it talks about like how it's like super deep blood, like for really far. The 144,000 definitely are a reference back to chapter 7. So here's where things start to connect. If you take the preterist view and you say these are 144,000 historic ethnic Jews who escaped from the destruction of Jerusalem in chapter 7, then you should do that with this 144,000 now, or whatever you conclude in one place, you should be consistent, right? I think this is the number of all of God's people. I think it's a symbolic number, a complete amount of God's people. The harvest of the earth comes in 2 parts again, and interestingly, Jesus himself talked about this in a parable. So I gave you the reference there for Jesus tells the parable, and this is one of those times where his disciples then later say, what does that parable mean? And he actually explains it, and he talks about at the end of the age, the Son of Man will come, and the harvest of the earth will happen. And then finally, Revelation chapter 14, and this harvest of the earth feels very much like final judgment. And so most people would say, okay, this seems like we're jumping forward to the end, because if you remember last week, Revelation 15 and 16 are the 7 bowls of God's judgment. So most people who view Revelation as happening chronologically or in a futurist way would say, well, this doesn't though. Okay? This is a fast forward to something that's going to happen at the end, and then the bowl judgments go back and fill that in. All right, let's look at Revelation chapter 17. Jake, you want to read the text for us and get us started rolling?
I can do that. So, maybe. So Revelations 17, 1. One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits by many waters. With her the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries. Then the angel carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness. There I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and was glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. She held a golden cup in her hand filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. The name written on her forehead was a mystery, Babylon, the great mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of God's holy people, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. When I saw her, I was greatly astonished. Then the angel said to me, why are you astonished? I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and of the beast she rides, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The beast which you saw once was, now is not, and yet will come up out of the abyss and go to its destruction. The inhabitants of the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the creation of the world, will be astonished when they see the beast, because it once was, now is not, and yet will come. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. 10, they are also, 10. Yeah. I was like, that's a number in Revelation. Okay. So there are also the 7 kings. 5 have fallen. 1 is, the other has not yet come. But when he does come, he must remain for only a little while. The beast who once was and now is not is the 8th king. He belongs to the 7 and is going to his destruction. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but who for 1 hour will receive authority as kings along with the beast. They have one purpose and will give their power and authority to the beast. They will wage war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will triumph over them because he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And with him will be his called, chosen, and faithful followers. Then the angel said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. The beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to accomplish his purpose by agreeing to hand over to the beast their royal authority until God's words are fulfilled. The woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth.
All right. Okay, we're gonna do. Let's start with historicist, because I'm already standing up and Jake is still sitting down, and I'm gonna do the historicist notes. All right, I want to draw your attention as we begin to read this with historicist lenses on, of something that John writes in verses 3 through 4. He says he sees the woman sitting on a scarlet beast. And then the woman was dressed in purple and scarlet, glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. Okay? So keep in mind that for most historicists, they view almost all the negative images and symbols in the book of Revelation as somehow related to the Roman Catholic Church and all the oppression it's done in some ways to faithful Christians. And so if you look at the robes that the different priests wear, and especially the Pope, there's purple and scarlet and all kinds of gold and jewels. And they're like, there you go. And when it talks about that she holds a golden cup in her hand filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries, they would point to the practice of selling indulgences. Right? If you give enough money, you can get out of purgatory free. Religious relics, basically making money off of people, sacrilegious practices. Later it talks about her being drunk with the blood of the saints, and again they would point to all the persecutions of the Roman Church against faithful Christians throughout the generations. So they say the 7-headed beast on which the Roman Catholic Church sits is the city of Rome. Rome was built on 7 hills. And so let's say city of Rome. And what do you find in the city of Rome? The Vatican, the seat of the Roman Catholic Church. Then again, though, this is historicist view, so they're trying to match this in line with history. And so they would say that the 10 kings would refer to the 10 Romano-Gothic kingdoms that existed around 532 AD. And significantly, those same kingdoms united to destroy Rome. So that could be one historicist view, that this already happened. Another alternative historicist view is that this is prophesying sometime in the future, 10 kingdoms will gang up together to destroy the Roman Catholic Church.
This is where I get lost with these words. Historicist is looking at it.
Sorry, I should have said that first.
Historical.
Yeah, historicists say you can map the book of Revelation onto the events that have happened throughout history. So some of the things that we read were in John's day, and some of them have been fulfilled already at different points throughout history, and some of them are yet still to come.
So the preterist view, right, so that's saying that in 2 different ways, that all of these things are completed in 70 AD, between Revelation 4 and 19, that all finishes by 70 AD. There are some preterists who would say, hey, they don't actually all complete. Some of them are still to come near the end of the Roman Empire. Those are less common preterists as compared to the ones who believe that's going to end in 70 AD. So the great harlot, I used a different translation when I was making mine than Luke did, is seen most frequently as the city of Rome. Sometimes people see it as Jerusalem. That's one of their big disagreements that goes on, but most of the time they see it as the city of Rome. The scarlet beast, they're saying, is referring to the clothes that the Roman soldiers would wear. And so they say the city of Rome is sitting on top of the Roman military, and that's where they're getting all their power from, right? And so the beast is a Roman Empire. It keeps the city of Rome supplied with the blood of martyrs, pearls, gold, all of the jewels and everything. So that is about how they keep their power through hurting and conquering others. And then, yes.
Why would they think Jerusalem would be it?
Yeah, so they would say sometimes that the Jerusalem is it because they would be referencing back to the book of Ezekiel, where Ezekiel calls Jerusalem like a whore, and that they would say Jerusalem has sold itself to Rome, and that that it's riding Rome and trying to stay alive / selling out their true religion of Judaism to the Roman Empire for power. That's what they would say. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. And then they would also kind of draw this parallel between the idea that the king Nero and the Roman Empire are kind of synonymous. If you look throughout ancient cultures, the leader of a nation and the nation itself kind of work synonymously. Like when David gets in trouble, God says, David, you can either take punishment, the city can take punishment, or the nation can take punishment for what you've done. And then even when we look at Jesus, he takes punishment for the church. And so there's this big thing where the nation and the leader of that nation are kind of synonymous. And so it's saying, while the beast that she's riding is Rome, Nero is the epitome of what Rome is and what Rome stands for, right? Rome, like Luke said, is classically known as the city that it sits on 7 hills. And interestingly enough, the predators would remind us that the Vatican is not one of those 7 hills. It's actually an 8th hill that's not connected to those 7. But they would go on to say that the kings, I think this lines up kind of fun, the 5 that have come are Julius Caesar, Augustus Caesar, Tiberius Caesar, Caligula, Claudius, the one who is reigning now, Nero, a guy named Galba, who no one has heard of because he reigned for 7 months, which is when they say he has reigned for a short time. That kind of counts. And then afterwards, they have a king named Vespasian. He comes to power after civil war, and he's called a Caesar, but he is not related to the Caesars. So that is the point at which the Caesar dynasty has ended, and he is like them because he's a ruler of Rome and he's a Caesar, but he's not actually related to them at all. And a lot of people would say that this is the end of the Roman dynasty at this point. Okay? And Vespasian wins in a civil war, and he's like the 7, but not of the 7. And then they would say the 10 horns are actually that Rome had 10 provinces. Had 10 provinces that they had conquered and had like puppet kings in that were giving Rome its power because the puppet kings would send them people for the military and would send them gold and tribute. And that these 10 kings, these 10 vassal states, give power to Rome, help persecute Christians, and then they turn around and they stab Rome in the back. Okay, so that would be what the preterists would think of, and they would say that that kind of ends with Rome being devoured by these 10 different kingdoms. Cool. Any questions on that? Cool.
Is the harlot not also called Babylon?
Yeah,
It is
so
called Babylon.
the harlot is called Babylon, and this is a good point to bring up. And that Babylon is kind of like Watergate. You guys know, everyone knows Watergate, the Watergate scandal. You remember Pizzagate, or whenever anything, that's the only one I remember, but like whenever anything, the one that didn't actually matter and didn't actually happen. But you know, like all of the different scandals that they put gate at the end of, it's like everything references Watergate because in everyone's mind in America, that's the worst political scandal that we remember. And so everything is in that light. So the Jews, yeah, we'll tell, yeah, true. So, but that's kind of how the Jews see Babylon. That's how the Christians see Babylon, is Babylon's the worst thing that ever happened. Everything that comes after that is kind of like another Babylon. And so everything is compared to Babylon. And so when they say, and like there's the headband idea, it's the woman's wearing a headband that says Babylon, and we'll talk about that in the idealist view because they care a little bit more about it. But they would say that that's kind of referencing that this person is acting or owned by Babylon. They're acting like Babylon. Does that make sense? So yeah, the preterists would say it's not actually Babylon. It's just that every bad person, every bad kingdom ever is Babylon to the Jews. Yeah, that's a good question. So, anything else? Coolio.
Can you leave that up there?
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, to build off that, because I'm going to talk about the futurists the futurists next. And futurists are divided on whether this is talking about a future Babylon or a future Rome. And for the reasons that Jake just articulated, as well as other ones, there is a sense when you read through the Old Testament, all these prophecies of like, because remember, Daniel wrote the things he wrote while he was in exile in Babylon. Eventually, under the reign of Cyrus, the people are allowed to return to the land. You can read about the rebuilding of the temple and then the gates within Ezra and Nehemiah. And they thought when they returned to the land that there would be this glorious return of their former glory and the presence of the Lord. And it's actually a big letdown because when Moses finished the tabernacle, what happened? Cloud filled it. God's glory was there. What happened when Solomon finished the temple? Cloud filled it. What happened when they finished rebuilding the temple? Crickets. And so there's all these prophecies about like when we return from exile, then God's going to restore our former glory, and the nations are going to stream to Jerusalem, and it's going to be amazing. And none of that happens. And there's this sense when you read even the New Testament that the Jewish hope is like, okay, we're in the land, but we're still in exile, because we were being ruled over by Babylon. Now we're being ruled over by Rome, and we still don't have all our freedoms. And the glory of the Lord has not returned to the land, has not gone back to the temple, and so that's how they became kind of synonymous of. We're still in exile. Now Rome's ruling over us, our current Babylon. So futurist. I want to kind of follow along with the text a little more too. All right.
Can I
Yep.
This whole thing with the Catholic Church.
Yes.
I'm assuming Catholics don't care for this.
I would assume so. Yes. That's a safe assumption.
But I mean, how does it get to that? Just from Rome?
Yeah. So this is one of those times where take everything I say with a grain of salt because I'm not a historicist. And I have some big problems with the historicist view, which is why I'm not a historicist. It was, if I remember right, it was a very popular way of reading Revelation at certain points in history when there were faithful Christian groups who were being persecuted by Rome. So as they looked at their own circumstances and then were reading the book of Revelation, they're like, that beats the empire.
Wasn't in existence when old Rome was there, was it?
No. So again,
But they're being lumped together?
Yeah, so the historicism really came to like its biggest popularity during the Protestant Reformation when they were breaking away from the Catholic Church and they were at war constantly with Catholic nations and Protestant nations were killing each other. And people like John Calvin and these other Protestant people were the ones who were pushing historicism forward, even to the point where like some of their catechisms, like the Westminster Catechism, says very specifically, the Pope is the Antichrist. He is the beast.
Because I'm reading the book now, Elizabeth I and
Yep, exactly. Say that kind of thing is part of historically what was pushing historicism to view, like the historicists, to view the Roman Catholic Church as the full embodiment of the evil of Rome from Revelation.
Yeah.
But at that time, how many people actually had
scripture?
because it was put away and it wasn't
Well,
given out to people?
see, the thing though, at that time, increasingly so people had scripture who had never had it before, because the Protestant Reformation partly got kicked off because of the printing press and then the translation of scriptures into the languages people read instead of Latin. And so now everyone can read the scripture for themselves, and they're starting to realize the things they've been told by the Roman Catholic Church don't line up with what's written there. And so then they're reading Revelation as well. Does that make sense? So they kind of all come together a little bit. Okay, the futurist view would say that many futurists actually would say, yes, this sounds like Rome, but it's not historic ancient Rome, that in the future there will be a revived Rome, a Romanesque empire with a Roman-ish ruler, if you will. And so, in that sense, Babylon, this prostitute, might represent either the Catholic Church or a great apostate religious entity formed under the Antichrist. Either one, they would say. Then most futurists believe that the events that happen here would have to happen before the bowl judgments. Okay, because right now we're in Revelation 17. Revelation 15, 16 recount these 7 bowl judgments, and the last of the bowl judgments says, basically, and then Jesus comes. So they say this must be recounting something that happened before that 7th bowl. And so they would place these events somewhere in the middle of the tribulation. So some futurists say that this is literally talking about Rome, that in the last days, a coalition of apostate churches will be headquartered in Rome. Others would interpret this more symbolically, saying that this represents a political, cultural, commercial idea, center of power. Either way, it's basically a symbol for human civilization in rebellion against God. And so futurists would say at the end, before Jesus returns, human civilization will be united against God. Verses 7 through 11, again, we've already seen this, sitting on 7 hills. So this is Rome in some sense, but again, futurists debate if it's literal Rome or figurative Rome. And then skipping down to verses 12 through 14, if you're reading along, the 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have, oh, sorry, never mind. That's not what I wanted to read. Verses 9 and 10. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. They are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen. 1 is, the other has not yet come. Okay, so this is an area where there's disagreement on. But these 7 kings, who are they? Most futurists would say that there's like a pause in God's plan. So the 5 that have fallen would actually, the first 4 of those would be the 4 beasts that Daniel saw. So 5 have fallen. Yeah, so the 6 would be Rome in John's day, and then there's this coming final kingdom. It's almost like it's describing the kings that have been through John's day, but then fast forward to the end, there will be one more 8th king who will be terrible and the worst of all of them. He belongs to the 7 and is going to his destruction. So again, and then futurists say, yeah, these 10 kings are going to be this league of 10 powers or nations or rulers who will work together, and they're going to together stamp out all religion except for the worship of the beast at the end times. That's what how they're gonna unite together.
Okay, so the idealist, right? So the idealist is more of the spiritualist view, where it's saying, hey, these things line up with lots of things throughout history because history repeats itself over and over and over again, right? And so they would say the woman riding on the beast is wearing a headband with her name on it. Like I might have kind of alluded to earlier, is that Roman prostitutes would wear a headband with their name on it. I don't know why they would do that, but they would. And it was one of those things that everyone knew, kind of like the political cartoon, right? Everyone knew if you saw someone wearing a headband with their name, they were a prostitute. And so they're saying, hey, the woman is riding the beast, and this connects Babylon with Rome, and saying, hey, this is true of every major nation that has ever existed. Saying there's always people that sell themselves out to the world power at the time, whether it be Babylon, whether it be the Persians, whether it be Rome, whether it be Nazi Germany. There's always people selling themselves out to whatever is in power at the time. Okay, and they would say that the beast, actually they're the only ones that would say this, the beast is Satan, or it's the minions or people doing the will of Satan. Using Nazi Germany as an example, it would be saying that Satan or the minions of Satan are what is actually making this evil empire go. So the idealist would say you should look at anybody who is doing things that seem like they're against Christianity and say they are being worked on or worked through. Satan is working through them, and we should avoid them, and we should make sure not to sell ourselves out to that idea. They would then say the 7 heads represent the current embodiment of the beast Rome and is referencing the repetitive nature of beasts coming to power in the world and fulfilling the spirit of Babylon, the ancient kingdoms of the world who have already come and who will come. Again, with 7 being a number of kind of completeness, it's that they're continuing over and over and over again. And then they would go on to say, so there's a little bit of a disagreement about the 10 kings. The most common is that the 10 kings are representative of kingdoms that will rise after Rome and will continue through the cycle. And there are some that say that 10 is not a specific number, and it's just talking about all of the different kingdoms that pick apart big kingdoms. So some would say, hey, this looks like it's the 10 provinces of Rome picking apart Rome, but what actually matters is that this is what happens when big evil kingdoms go over their crest and they start dying. Other kingdoms come in. And some would say, this isn't actually about Rome. It's just the fact that every time a big kingdom dies, a bunch of other vulture kingdoms come and tear it apart. And basically trying to get the point across that what we see throughout history is that whenever a big evil kingdom that does Satan's work comes into power, it dies and it gets picked apart and it never has the glory that Satan wants it to have. It always fails. So the spiritualists are focusing on that idea. Evil fails. The people who sell out to evil are proved wrong, and they get washed up with the evil that they've been serving. Cool.
Which is what's happening right now.
So yeah. So any questions on that as an idea?
And the globals.
So I want to point out a couple things that you can stay up here,
Yeah.
Jake,
Okay.
because we'll do some Q&A now.
Coolio.
Well, actually, you're going to do Revelation 18 and 19. But with Revelation 17, what you kind of sense, and you can actually see reflected here, is there are some parts that are more clear and there are some parts that are less clear. And as I've been reading different commentaries and listening to even different teachings, a lot of people have heard several ways of articulating the same thing of don't miss the forest for the trees in the book of Revelation. It can be easy to get stuck in the weeds and like bog down and focus in like, what is this one thing? It's like, okay, it's a vision. And again, this is an imperfect analogy, but be like, no, but what is the gun? What does the gun mean, right? It's like, no, the point, right? What's the big picture of going on? That's what you have to focus on. And so I reading through this, even myself, I was frustrated of like, okay, 7 hills. Got it. That like almost everyone's like, that's Rome. Great. We got that. But then some of the other things, and it's not just 7 hills, it's 7 kings. 5 are, one is yet to come. It's like, wait, this is more tricky.
Well, then saying that when it says like 5 have been,
Mm-hmm.
1 is not, and 1's to come. So does that mean John, there were 5 that have been in his time that were past, and 10 horns are who have not yet received their kingdom? So all of those 10 have to be in front of John.
Yeah, so I think depending on who you're talking to, right? If you're talking to a preterist, they're going to say that's talking about the 7 Caesars, the 5 before John, the 1 during John, and the 1 after that one. Or the futurist, like Luke was talking about, is like he's saying it's 5 kingdoms before John, and then 1 during John, and then 1 after. And so I think, yes, people would say you have to view whatever the 5 and then the 1 and then the 1. It makes the most sense to view it as him as being the one that currently is, and there being 5 before him and 1 after.
One thing though, it is a prophecy, and if you look back on any of the prophecies throughout the Bible, they turn out to be exactly accurate.
Yeah. And to build off that point, Nancy, I think that should both encourage us, but also cause humility, because now for us, looking back on all the prophecies about Jesus, they make perfect sense. But how many Jews in Jesus' day understood those prophecies to mean, right?
Had it right.
Yeah. How many people got it right? Not very many. Not very many.
Hindsight's always.
Yeah, hindsight's 2020. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So Revelation 18. So I thought this was, I was actually kind of laughing because when Luke was preparing 12 through 14, he was like, yeah, it was actually kind of nice. Like a lot of the symbols, like a lot of people interpreted the same. And then I started working on Revelation 18, and immediately there were even more views on what Babylon was than there were views that we're discussing. So that was like, thanks for giving me the hard one. They talk about basically Revelation 18 goes through, I'm going to flip to it really quick. It goes through like this cursing of Babylon. So it says, John says, after this, I saw another angel with great authority coming down from the heaven, and the earth was illuminated by his splendor. He called out in a mighty voice, it has fallen. Babylon the Great has fallen. She has become a home for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, and a haunt for every unclean beast and every unclean and despicable beast. And basically the chapter is going, basically saying, hey, Babylon is destroyed. Babylon is destroyed. These are all the bad things that are happening to Babylon. And then in verse 4, it also talks about, then I heard another voice from heaven, come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins or receive of her plagues. For her sins are piled up to heaven, and God has remembered her crimes. And then it ends with this idea, or it goes forward into this idea of, gosh, if I could find the exact spot that I'm looking for. In verse 24, in her was found the blood of prophets and saints, and for all those slaughtered on the earth. That's verse 24. So it goes through these cursings. It goes through a warning telling people to come out. And then it also talks about why this stuff is being called down, why there is woe being called down on the city, and why it falls. Okay? So people at different points, some preterists call Babylon Rome. Some preterists call Babylon Jerusalem. The historicists call it the Roman Catholic Church. The futurists, for the most part, call it a rebuilt Babylon or Rome. And the idealist says this is a representation of every evil kingdom throughout history and what befalls them. Regardless of what the specific referent is, regardless of what city it's talking about, or if it's talking about every city, it talks about believers are called to separate themselves and not to be a part of the evil that takes place there, and not to be washed up in the aftermath of the evil. It says, hey, dudes, you see it going bad, you should leave if you can, right? And then finally, it's like the punishment is for many evils. And the last evil that's mentioned, right? So it says in verse 24, it says, in her was found the blood of prophets and saints, and for all those slaughtered on the earth. That one of the reasons, and probably maybe the primary reason, that Babylon is being punished is because what they've done to the truth and to Christians who are trying to follow God. And that basically this idea runs through it, that the people of God who are hurt will be avenged by God, and people who are doing evil and Satan's work won't be able to get away with it. Revelation 19 starts this celebration in heaven. The defeat of Babylon has this flurry of worship for God who has avenged his people. The beasts and the kings of the world then come up and try one last time to fight. So in verse 1 of chapter 19, after this I heard something like the loud voice of a vast multitude in heaven saying, hallelujah, salvation and glory and power belong to our God, because his judgments are true and righteous, because he has judged the notorious prostitute who corrupted the earth with her sexual immorality, and he has avenged the blood of his servants that was on her hands. The prostitute being defeated is compared kind of to a divorce, where God is separating from these people who he has been providing for, and they've used it poorly. And then there is a wedding where it seems like it's Christ at the wedding feast, and Christ is kind of combining with his church and helping his church. And then what happens in verse 17 says, then I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he called out in a loud voice saying to all the birds flying high overhead, come gather for the great supper of God. This is the wedding feast, so that you may eat the flesh of the kings, the flesh of military commander, the flesh of the mighty of the flesh, the horses and the riders, the flesh of everyone, both free and slave, small and great. Then I saw the beast, the kings of the earth, and their armies gathered together to wage war. So he has collapsed Babylon, whatever Babylon stands for, with the view that you take. And there is like kind of a battle of the bulge moment where the beast comes out with the last of his power and attacks the wedding feast to try to stop Jesus in his final declaration of victory. And this is actually an interesting that the sword comes out of the mouth of Jesus. This is how Jesus is victorious. The sword comes out of his mouth and it slays all of the people that he is fighting against. And then it says in verse 20, both of them were thrown alive into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur. The rest were killed with the sword that came from the mouth of the rider on the horse, which is Jesus in every view that I've read. And all the birds ate their fill of their flesh. So they were often, this sword, right, if we think about the sword in the armor of God, is referencing to the gospel. And it's coming from his mouth, so it's like he's speaking the truth, and that's what is destroying his enemies in this picture. It doesn't seem to be very much of a physical battle, so much as Jesus declaring victory through his death. And then he wins. Revelation 19. Any questions on either 18 or 19?
I just want to point out another parallel with the sword of coming from his mouth is also that this final defeat echoes Genesis 1 in creation.
Oh, yeah.
Everything comes into being just by words and speaking. Yeah.
God declares the creation, he declares his victory, and those things happen. It's not like it's very much of a struggle. But be excited for next week, because if you remember the first week when we had to go through what preterist and idealist and historicist, and it was a lot of learning about the 4 categories, we get to do that again next week with 4 new categories.
Yeah. So these will be more familiar to me.
That's true.
More, I think.
Yeah. So perfect. Do we want to close in prayer?
Yeah. Would you do that first?
Yeah. So I'll close in prayer, and then if you have any questions you would like to ask individually afterwards, feel free. Everyone bow your eyes and close your heads. Lord, thank you for this day, and thank you for this time together where we get to look at and study a book that we've all probably looked at some point and maybe put away and not known what to do with. Lord, help us, no matter what our mileage is, to continue to study it and to continue to have an open mind and an open heart towards what you want to teach us from it. Lord, we thank you that you are victorious in all struggle, and we ask that you help us to remember that no matter what evil and harshness goes on in the world, that you are victorious and you care for us and that you will help us through. In Jesus' name, amen.